Lily, how are you? Tell us about founding Google. How was that? Yeah.
You are not the product.
Yes. So we're not here to talk about Google. We're here to talk about Impossible, which is your gifting venture, gifting economy venture. Could you, for the benefit of those in the audience who don't know about it, can you kind of lay it out for us, where the idea came from and what it does?
So Impossible is something that me and a friend had the idea for about 4 years ago. Started proactively working on a few years ago and launched the end of last year. The idea was to use technology to connect people to do things for each other, to trade skills, services, without money being a medium. And so kind of you could see it as part of the sharing economy, the extreme end of the spectrum where money isn't even involved in the peer-to-peer interactions. Right now, it's a community, essentially. It's a community of people who buy into that philosophy and help each other by giving objects, giving skills, giving services.
Mm-hmm. So the sort of cynic in me would say, you know, why would anyone log on to a website and give things away without anything tangible in return? I mean, is that a cynical, very, very cynical view? I mean, you don't have that view, clearly. So what?
Well, you have to remember that every time someone gives, someone receives.
Right.
So the implicitly you are receiving. If you're part of a community, you operate in that way, you ideally do both. And I think the community only works by doing both. And so I don't think there's anybody taking value from it without giving value and vice versa.
Mm-hmm. So what sort of things are given? What's a range of there are a range of gifts have been exchanged using this site, haven't they?
Yeah, I would say we have a very global community. So 73 countries signed up over the last year, which is not something we necessarily foresaw or planned, and it's meant that a lot of the trading has been online. So everything from, you know, could I get advice on my CV to I want to learn a language, to emotional stuff, to skills-based stuff. And then where we do have more localized communities, so somewhere like London where there's quite a strong community, we have meetups and you have people kind of, you know, doing in-person kind of activities and physical objects being shared.
Mm-hmm. So where did the idea come from? And where, you know, no, but it's a kind of a unique proposition.
It came because I was traveling with a friend 4 years ago, and we were talking about the financial crisis and why is it that when economies kind of go into crisis, that societies immediately go into crisis. Because if you think about it, there is arguably an abundance of skills, services, time, and even some, you know, most resources. And in those moments, we become so dependent as societies on money that we lose the medium by which to exchange things. Mm-hmm. And so we were kind of philosophically deconstructing that and saying, actually, why is it that we couldn't learn to trade in other ways? And wouldn't it be healthy if there were other ways and other alternatives alongside monetary economies? And we said, what if technology tried to do that in these kind of very complex cities we live in, where it's not always easy to know what your neighbors are doing, or even what your friends are doing often, or what skills they might have to offer.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's not a non-profit, is it? I mean, it sounds like it could be a non-profit, but you set up eventually to be run as a business, didn't you?
Yeah, it's a social business, and we're actually working on putting in the business model now. It's in development. We'll be probably opening it next year. I'm quite keen on that because I think that I'm a big supporter of other charities, but I think that ultimately business is very powerful and it's more sustainable, and I would rather look at how we can make it sustainable in the long term and even if possible make it more powerful as a force to grow and do other kind of projects in this space.
So how would the business model work? What's the? I mean, you know, you have a platform where people give gifts to each other. How do you capitalize on that?
So what we're looking at, we have several different ideas, and I'm sure we'll pursue a couple of them, but the main one I'm excited by and focused on is looking at gifting products, and I mean paid-for products. And so creating a platform that will exist in parallel to Impossible, where people will be able to buy physical objects, gift physical objects. The one kind of special and I think important criteria there will be that we'll only sell products that will have powerful stories behind them. And that kind of ties to a lot of the work I've done over the last 10 years in fashion, looking at supply chains. And I'm a big believer that when you clean up supply chains, when you kind of create positive social environmental impact in supply chains, business is a real force for good in the world and really can fix a lot of the global problems we have. And there's a huge number of companies in that space, from everything from jewelry made from guns that are taken off the streets and melted down to this designer Eden I'm wearing. They get all their clothes manufactured in Africa to support trade rather than aid models. There's a huge number of really fascinating companies that I would like to try and champion and support through Impossible and alongside what we're doing with the kind of non-monetary gifting platform.
So it'd be a sort of e-commerce platform alongside the gifting
kind of e-commerce
network.
meets product journalism.
Right. What sort of advice have you got, or what's the reception been like that you've got from the tech community? Because this is quite a new. Yeah. You don't come from the tech community. You come from the sort of modeling world. So what sort of reception have you been given?
I found really, really, really receptive. I've got probably more friends now in tech than in fashion because I've taken up so much of my life for the last 3 years, and I find it a very, very welcoming environment. I mean, it's such an innovative space, and it's full of people trying to come up with new ideas and trying to bring them to realities. It's a really hard thing to try and do, to have a startup, and I would take my hat off to all the different startups you see here, for example. And I think because of that, because it is, there's so much risk and it is so difficult, I feel like it's a very generous community, and I've met a lot of generosity from other people in the community who've tried to help me essentially bring an idea into a reality.
We were talking earlier about Jimmy Wales and Wikipedia, and he played a role in this, or at least help nudge you along, didn't he? How did that come about?
Yeah, so I met Jimmy several years ago at the very beginning of this journey, and I was excited to meet him. It was a kind of chance meeting, but I was very excited to meet him because Wikipedia is actually one of the biggest known kind of working at scale gift economies. And if you look up the term gift economy on Wikipedia, you'll find Wikipedia in its answer. And he immediately kind of resonated with what I was trying to do, and became an investor, became an advisor, and kind of constantly cheerleads us along the way.
Yeah, so are you, is this your sort of full-time gig now for you?
Pretty much. Yeah. I spend a month or 2 months, usually a year acting, and then the rest of the year working more than the normal hours trying to do things like this. Yeah.
But you mentioned sort of socially conscious products and supply chain, and we were talking earlier about your visit to Brazil, to the rainforest. What were you doing there, and how does that connect? How does that sort of feed into what you've been trying to do with Impossible?
So I have a project I've been doing for a couple of years. It began with WWF and Sky looking at the rubber trade, and they asked me to get involved partially because they knew of my interest in looking at supply chains and working with companies that have very innovative supply chains. And they were working on a project looking at wild rubber, and there are rubber trees spread throughout the Amazon that have grown in the wild that historically have made a living for people living in the forest, but over the last 100 years it's been impossible for that to compete with plantation rubber when there's no kind of market differentiation between wild and plantation rubber. And so our kind of logic with the project was, can we create a consumer market for wild rubber? Similar but different to the way we do with organic or fair trade, where people are willing to pay a slight premium, or brands are willing to invest a very slight small margin into creating products with wild rubber in order to be able to communicate that to consumers, that by buying those products, you're essentially paying people in the forest to protect the forest. And we do that at jewelry, trainers. Vivienne Westwood made a dress with us. And I went out a few weeks ago to look at condoms, actually, and the only wild rubber condom factory in the world. Yeah. And just to see what the different production possibilities are with condoms, also with several other manufacturing possibilities. That's a perfect example of the kind of thing we want to sell through the gifting platform on Impossible. And it's developing separately right now, but I could see in future the two things kind of coming together.
So there are other examples of sort of celebrity-fronted businesses. I think, particularly with a kind of Hollywood or connection, like Gwyneth Paltrow has a business, Blake Lively has a business. This seems very different. I mean, do you sort of bristle at the comparison, or I
always bristle at the word celebrity, but
right.
I I feel like I'm very blessed that because I've had a kind of public profile a little bit through fashion and through film, it enables me, to get to sit on this stage or to get to, the interest of a newspaper or journalist. But beyond that, quite kind of, important but superficial presentation of it, really the product will only work if we have a good product, if we design a tool that's useful for people. And so I think, that element only goes so far in actually trying to make something like this successful. And at the end of the day, we are a startup of a small team, really working and listening and looking at data and just trying to get better at what we're doing.
So the modeling hasn't been ditched completely, but this is where you're headed.
I could count on one hand the amount of modeling things I've done in the last year. I do a small amount of it to A, shine a light on things like this, and B, occasionally pay bills because I'm not making money from.
Right. Well, I'm sure everyone would wish you luck with Impossible. We're out of time, so thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
It'll be cold, ladies and gentlemen.